Hey guys, this is Sandeep from Wireless and welcome to a camera review of the Realme 7 Pro. Now in case you already haven't seen our Realme 7 camera review that we uploaded yesterday, please do make sure to check it out as that will help add some bit of context to this particular video as we are referencing it in between. Now before we get this started, please do make sure to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications for more videos like this. Now let's begin the video. In terms of camera hardware, the Realme 7 Pro is pretty much identical to the Realme 7 considering that it has a quad camera setup with a primary Sony IMX682 sensor with 64 megapixels of resolution, 1 by 1.73 inch sensor size and f1.8 aperture. You also get an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensor as well as a 2 megapixel macro camera with a minimum focusing distance of 4 centimeters. While the optics and sensors are practically identical on both the phones, what is different is the fact that they both use different processors. So there's a Snapdragon 720G on the Realme 7 Pro while you get a Helio G95 chipset from MediaTek on the Realme 7, and that has caused changes in terms of the image processing as well. While the dynamic range is just as good if not better on the Realme 7 Pro, there's also some changes in terms of the overall sharpness and detail which we found to be better on the Realme 7 Pro compared to the Realme 7. Now this still does not really look like a 64 megapixel sensor, and we would suggest that Realme does work on its algorithm to get better quality and detail, and just like the Realme 7, this is also evident again when you look at the processed JPEG images that you get from the raw photos compared to the JPEGs that the phone gives straight out of the camera. One thing that went worse compared to the Realme 7 was the fact that the Realme 7 Pro photos did have more saturation compared to the more natural looking palette that the Realme 7 had. But the most major difference, and one that is probably a deal breaker or the deal maker for most of them, is the fact that the Realme 7 Pro captures much better photos in low light conditions compared to Realme 7 as a result of the better ISP and better processing. So in low light images, the Realme 7 exhibited high levels of noise, but in this the noise is kept to a minimum and you have an overall well exposed frame, while using night mode takes all those things to a next step by increasing the exposure, bettering the details from the shadows and also reducing noise in the same process while adding a bit of clarity to the mix that makes it feel that the apparent sharpness is higher. Portrait mode is decent but not great, and here too the softness on the portion in focus is quite apparent just like the Realme 7, but what's different is the fact that there is better edge detection and there are lesser parts that are missed in terms of blurring compared to the Realme 7. Still, there is a long way to go in order to tweak it and make it much better. Coming to ultra wide angle camera, yes, the field of view is drastically bigger than the regular camera, and as a result you can create more dramatic looking images, but then again the sharpness is actually much lesser than the primary camera. But what's good here is the fact that it's actually more detailed compared to the ultra wide angle camera performance on the Realme 7, but what we noticed is also the fact that this posts warmer colors with a slight purplish or pinkish tint compared to the regular camera. Low light performance for the ultra wide angle camera too is a similar story, as the performance is actually better than the Realme 7 with much better exposure and details as well as lower levels of noise. But then again, if you can use the primary camera, I would suggest going for it as the images are much more better and more usable compared to the ultra wide angle camera, but it's still better compared to the Realme 7. Now the macro camera. The 2 megapixel macro camera can focus at a minimum distance of 4 centimeters, and to be honest it's not all that great. While it was acceptable back when macro cameras started coming on smartphones, we would assume that by now Realme would upgrade to a better quality camera such as a 5 megapixel one that Xiaomi uses, so hopefully they do that in upcoming models. But as of now, it's always better to shoot with the primary camera and then crop in later in order to get better quality photos. The front-facing camera on the Realme 7 Pro is a 32 megapixel f2.5 sensor, and the overall image quality is pretty good in terms of dynamic range as well as the sharpness and detail, and is also much better than the Realme 7. However, the sharpness and detail could be a tad bit better, and I suggest that fine-tuning the processing would make it better, or maybe even using a Gcam port considering that this smartphone comes with a Snapdragon 720G chipset. Apart from that, there's also the tendency, like the Realme 7, in order to overexpose the frame, and you have to manually correct it by touching your face and locking that portion in terms of exposure. When it comes to portrait mode, photos are better than the rear facing camera in terms of edge detection and the overall blurring, but here again, like the Realme 7, photos are captured only in 8 megapixels compared to the total 32 megapixels of resolution, while on the Realme 7 you got 4 megapixels of resolution compared to 16 megapixel sensor size. In terms of video recording, the phone can do a maximum 4K 30 FPS, which is a limitation on the sensors part as well, considering it can go only up to 4K 30 FPS, while the IMX686 can do up to 4K 60 FPS. Now, in terms of quality, the videos are pretty good overall, but if you notice, the center of the image especially has some pixel tearing that's happening, and this could be an issue with the current processing, and hopefully a software update will fix it. But other than this, it's pretty good, and you get stabilization, be it in 1080p 30 FPS mode with the regular camera and the ultra wide angle camera, as well as in 4K 30 FPS mode with the primary camera. Now, the ultra wide angle camera can only shoot in 1080p 30, but you can also make use of 1080p 60 and 4K 30 FPS modes on the regular camera, albeit with EIS on the 4K 30 FPS mode and without EIS on the 1080p 60 FPS modes. You can record slow motion videos at a maximum frame rate of 240 FPS with 720p of resolution, and you can also record time lapse up to 1080p resolution, and the quality of both is pretty decent. This is the front facing camera on the Realme 7 Pro capturing 1080p 30 FPS videos. Let me know what you guys think about the overall sharpness, dynamic range, how well is picking up my voice in this scenario, and the stabilization as well. Overall, the Realme 7 Pro is a much better camera phone compared to the Realme 7, despite the fact that they both share the same camera hardware at the back. The difference here is primarily in terms of the processing as well as the ISP due to the different chipsets that both of them have, as well as the superior hardware for the front-facing camera. If camera is your priority, then I would suggest going for the Realme 7 Pro, but then again, this too is not as good as what we have seen earlier in the past from the Poco X2. However, I think that with tweaks and with modifications to the processing algorithm, this could be one of the best in the segment, especially if you couple it with a Gcam mod. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, do let us know in the comment section below. See you again in the next one, and please don't forget to hit the subscribe button.